start now. Good day and hello everyone. Welcome to this webinar on internationalization of the curricula, new ways of enhancing South-South-North cooperation. My name is Agustina Calabrese and I'm representing Obreal Global Observatory, today replacing Dr. Nicolás Patrici, who unfortunately could not join us today. We have a very dynamic program. We have speakers joining us from Argentina, from Brazil and India, and we really look forward to the discussions. But before we get started, I would like to remind you that we have interpretation available in Spanish, Portuguese, and English. And you can select that in the globe icon on the bottom of your Zoom platform. In addition to that, I would like to remind you that the chat function is disabled. We would like you to share your questions and your comments in the Q&A icon that you also see in the bottom of your screen in the Zoom platform. And before giving the word to our chair today, I would like to introduce the webinar, saying that one core component of Obreal Global's mission is to facilitate and promote interregional dialogue and collaboration between different global regions. And this webinar is organized in the framework of those interregional dialogue series. These interregional dialogue series have been designed as a key feature of Obreal Global's activities to connect partners in different parts of the world and to explore themes of common and emerging interest in higher education from an international perspective. Today's session is the third session of the series, and it has been jointly organized by the Brazilian Association for Higher Education, FAUBAI, Symbiosis International University, and the South American and the Indian global chapters from Obreal. And this session is also supported by the Higher Education of Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I would like then to thank you all on behalf of Obreal Global's partners. And today's webinar, we'll discuss the internationalization of the curricula and the different challenges and opportunities in India and South American institutions. The webinar intends also to offer a general picture of the situation in India and in South America at the policy level. I would like then to welcome our chair today, Dr. Assis Saliba, Professor of Law and former Dean for International Relations at the Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais in Brazil. But before giving the floor to Dr. Saliba, I don't know if Ramon Torrent, President of Obreal Global, who is joining also the session today, would like to say something before we start, Ramon?
No, thanks, Agustina. You have introduced the webinar much better than I would have done. Only two apologies. One is to our Indian participants, beginning by Anita Patankar, for not having Hindi as a language of interpretation. This will come. It's more complicated than with the languages we are using now, but I wanted to apologize. And the second, simply to transmit the apologies of Nicolás Patrici, who is flying from the Middle East. He had to fly yesterday, but had the flight canceled at the last minute, and the flight was replaced by one today. So this is why he cannot be joining us. So that's all. Better to leave the word to the chair and to the panelists and close the, at least on my side, the video and the audio and let you work. Good day, bon dia, buenos días.
Thank you, Ramon. So Dr. Saliba, the floor is yours, and thank you.
Thank you, Agustina, and thank you, Dr. Ramon. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I would like to begin by thanking Obreal for the invitation to chair this panel. And without further delay, I'd like to introduce the participants of the first panel. We'll have, as you know, two panels here, one policy panel and then an institutional panel. In the policy panel, the first one will begin with Dr. N.V. Varghese, Vice Chancellor, National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration from India. and Dr. Monica Marquina, from the National Council of Scientific and Technical Research of Argentina. Pleased to be here, and I would like then to give the floor to Dr. Varghese.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation to share my views or my responses to the major question that is asked about internationalization of curricula. I think when we talk about curriculum changes, government is involved, but government is not directly involved when you're talking about higher education. We have to look into the autonomy that can be exercised by universities to decide what is to be taught and what is to be learned by the students. But at the same time, there is a framework that is developed, and there is a framework that is necessary within which we try to evolve and we try to create the curriculum. That is a sense in which we try to see that what is the link between the new education policy and the new curriculum changes that you're talking about. So that's the role of the state. It is not to dictate terms. The state is not to decide everything what is to be taught. That will be decided by the academic groups. But at the same time, there's a framework from which one has to look at the issues, So if you look at the curriculum development, the emphasis in the 20th century schooling has been acquiring content. Content was the focus in the 20th century, whereas in the 21st century, the emphasis on acquiring competency. So there is a lot of difference between the two. And for defining curriculum, these changes in the 20th century, changes in the 20th century and 21st century from the 20th century is very, very important. Why it is important is because you are not today talking about the content part alone, but it is enhancement of what we like to call as the competencies. While acquisition of content is very subject specific, acquisition of competency need not be specified into a particular subject. Therefore, it is transversal in that sense, when you talk about acquisition of competency. So there is a basic difference between the way the curriculum is to be organized and the way the syllabus is to be developed and the way curriculum is to be transacted. While it is very important to do so, how far we are succeeding in doing so is something that needs to be emphasized or that to be added. So the emphasis today is to go beyond the subject-specific content enhancement. I would like to emphasize that one. So today, many countries throughout the world, especially the recent changes that you find in New Zealand, Australia, Germany, Finland, etc., has moved to take the competencies as central to the educational reforms that are taking place. So that most of the educational reforms, especially in the area of curriculum that are taking place, are centered around competencies. India too, we talk about competency-based curriculum changes, So, and they try to see that they help their citizens and the students to engage actively in today's global knowledge-based society and to better prepare them for rapid changes that are occurring at the local, national, and international levels. So for example, when we talk about competency-based, what does that mean? According to UNESCO, competency comprises of 3 elements. One is the knowledge, second one is the skills, and third one is the attitude. It's very important. Attitude is something that we are not emphasized adequately as part of the curriculum transaction, because cognitive skill development was one of the major areas that we try to emphasize at all the points of time. How to integrate these 3 elements, knowledge, skills, and attitudes, is the major challenge that we face in curriculum framing and implementing any new curriculum. It is very important. So competency-based curriculum is an attempt to integrate these 3 elements in one place so that the students, or what we call as the graduate attributes, will be very different from what we used to see earlier, So how to make somebody globally competent, the students or the graduates, how they become globally competent, and will need the traits of critical thinking, intercultural literacy, digital literacy, and collaboration and cooperation. So if you're talking about a curriculum change in the context of internationalization, keeping what UNESCO's definition is, I would like to elaborate a little further in terms of saying that the student needs traits like critical thinking, intercultural literacy, digital literacy, and collaboration and cooperation, working in teams. And this will lead more towards producing a global citizen with a global perspective and global skills. That is the way we look at curriculum changes and curriculum development. If you look back, when you look into the curriculum changes that you're talking about, which is also reflected in this policy in India, the new policy in India, one has to make a distinction between two functions of schooling or education in general. One of the function is creating social cohesion. And you find that when countries got independence, especially the developing countries, when they got independence, one of the major concerns was that developing nationalism, developing national attitude, and developing or nationalizing development, nationalizing education. It is an important way in which curriculum changes took place at that point of time, because many of the curriculum in many countries had a colonial orientation. So how do you change from that colonial orientation? In Africa, it was called Africanization process, So in India, it is Indianization process, but India did not have that much problem like many other countries. So this is one of the important dimensions of one aspect of curriculum. The second aspect is the skills and the competencies that will be developed through the education system. So you find that these two put together, the question of national identity, and it was mostly emphasized more in the period of national independence and the post-independence period. But some countries do emphasize, perhaps overemphasize this even today, so that is something that needs to be explored. What is also happening is that explosion of enrollments in the higher education and in the school education system was primarily attributed to credentialing role that forced curriculum to change in a different way. Not the first role that I talked about as the what I talked about as a national identity. So the emphasis on curriculum development changed more to explosion due to explosion of enrollment, primarily contributing to credentialing, which linked education for acquiring skills needed for industrial development. So that is a different form, different ways. When initial stages, when the education system was a tiny sector, this was not the one which was emphasized more, but the emphasis was on other issues or social development, developing a good citizen, developing a national citizen, etc. were the emphasis, but that changed over a period of time. If you look back to India, in 1986, we had a policy that culminated with a decision for national curriculum framework. We started talking about national curriculum framework for containing common core and flexible ways, and there are two parts. One is the common core. The second one is the flexible part. The common core take into account what should be nationally achieved, whether a student is from region X, Y, or Z. They all should have some common core competencies to be achieved, and that was ensured by the common core. Then we had what is regional, Then we had two efforts in 1975 and also in 1988, another curriculum reform changes. And one major change that has taken place before the new policy is the National Curriculum Framework of 2005, which emphasized the diversities. That is very important to understand that when the system is remaining at an elite stage, when the enrollment ratios are very less, the system is elite, the issues of diversities are not addressed. But when the system gets massified and get it universalized at the school level, even at higher education level in India, it is massified and going to be universalized. So when it is getting to be universalized, the issues of diversity becomes important. And it is from this point of view that the new education policy, the curriculum changes that we talk in the new education policy assumes importance. How? It envisages to develop a national curriculum framework for school education and also for higher education. The curriculum changes envisaged will include subjects like artificial intelligence, design thinking, mathematical thinking, and global citizenship. I mean, that is something which is added to the new situation existing in the country. And it also shows that India's development efforts interfacing with the global changes and the internationalization, which is the topic for discussion today. The division of policy is to develop rootedness. That means an Indian rootedness and pride on India, but at the same time develop skills for global citizenship and global market. And this defines the area of intervention for curriculum changes in India. I'll repeat, as per the 2020 policy, what we find is that the vision in the policy is to develop a rootedness in India and a pride in Indian culture and ancestry. At the same time, develop knowledge and skills for global citizenship and global market to operate in a knowledge economy. That becomes a basis for that. The whole discussion about
la base.
Sorry. The competency-based curriculum are usually designed around a set of key competitiveness, and this is in response to these changes that you are talking about. That includes critical thinking, communication, and collaboration, and learning to learn. Because, it is very difficult to think about imparting job-specific skills by the university system today, because many jobs that we consider are disappearing. So therefore, when you are talking about training people for the jobs, the question will come, what job are you talking about? So therefore, learning to learn becomes one of the important dimensions of the education system, education policy, and educational transactions that are taking place in the colleges and the universities. What happens is that the focus is on learning outcomes, and learning outcomes specify what graduates are expected to know, what they understand, and what the graduates are able to do at the end of their program of study. So these three dimensions are getting together at three different points of time as a student. The expected learning outcomes are used as a reference point that would help formulate graduate attributes that I was mentioning about. And that is the way the curriculum formulation takes place, curriculum changes takes place, and also qualification descriptors, and also programming of learning outcomes. Now we talk about higher education qualification framework. Now you find that in Europe and in Latin America, you find that a skill qualification framework and higher education qualification frameworks are existing in different countries. Similarly, India is also in the process of developing. We already have a national skill qualification framework. We are also developing a national higher education qualification framework, which will define the competencies to be acquired by the students rather than the skills to be socialized to the students in doing. In practice, the governments around the world are responsible for setting the goals and aims of curriculum. As I mentioned earlier, universities are autonomous institutions. There is an academic institutional autonomy and academic freedom to be given to academicians. So therefore, the responsibility of the governments, most of the countries, is to set up the goals and aims of the curriculum rather than prescribing too much in terms of the syllabus that is to be taught. The jurisdictions do vary with the degree of autonomy that can be exercised. Governments are generally responsible for the development of programs of study and assessments, but are less involved in the direct production of learning and teaching resources, etc. So it is more of a framework to be provided. So what the policy mentioned, as I mentioned, the considerations, etc., should be seen only as a framework. But what actually will be transacted, what actually will be taught, what the students will be learned will be decided by the academic community. And in India, each university has a board of studies, each university has an academic council, and these councils will decide if a new course is to be introduced and the curriculum changes. So let me end by saying that public policy has an important dimension. Education policy in India has an important dimension. This dimension is more in terms of providing a framework rather than intervening too much into the minute details of what is to be taught. What is to be taught and the details of the program of study will be decided by the university. That is the way we see that we are working within the framework of a policy, but at the same time asserting autonomy of the institution and academic freedom for the faculty. That is the way the curriculum will be reformulated. Thank you very much for a patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Varghese. We'll have the opportunity of discussing some of the very interesting ideas you have posed to us. But before that, let me give the floor to our next panelist, Dr. Monica Marquina from the National Council of Scientific and Technical Research of Argentina. Dr. Marquina, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, profesor Saliba. Solo una cuestión organizativa.
Thank you, Professor Saliba. Should we speak 15 minutes altogether, or should we have 5 minutes for each part?
You may do as you wish. Puedes hacer lo que te parece mejor. Tenemos un poco más de tiempo porque la presentación.
You can do as you see fit. We have more time since the presentation was shorter than planned. Okay, so we will have a second possibility of presenting. Professor Marquina, the second chance is to answer the Q&A, the questions. So I will make my presentation during these 15 minutes. Thank you, Professor. The first question that we were asked in this panel was whether the international processes that exist in India and South America have a correlation or a relationship regarding learning, teaching methodologies, and curriculum in Argentina or in India and in South American universities. And this is fundamental because this meeting allows us to relate internationalization and curriculum. What I can say regarding the region of South America, according to my vision, internationalization policies have been conducted by looking to the north or to the south. When it comes to the internationalization of teaching, what we have in our region is the following. Experiences are conducted based on the financing opportunities from Europe and from North America. So to start with, I would ask myself the question is whether we have active internationalization processes between South America and the North or the East. Sometimes the financing is too small to promote South-South cooperation. Sometimes they are just reactive processes and not active processes. This internationalization, in this internationalization processes, curriculum is not a priority. When we have mobility agreements, the curriculum is not the most important priority. So there is no direct correlation between internationalization and the curriculum perspective. At least in the region today, there are no mechanisms to identify background or common areas as those that exist in the European Union. For example, in Europe, you have some mechanisms to be able to acknowledge those modules or courses that are common. And so in our case, what we do is we analyze those courses on a case-by-case mechanism. So it would be good to have a common framework to promote those experiences of mobility. And this has to do with the agreements that we have. So in order, what happens is that since there is no common ground, this is a thing that affects students, because students want to study abroad. But whether the courses are going to be acknowledged or recognized is not important for students, because they are caring about having that cultural experience. But when they come back to our countries, what happens is that those courses that they took abroad are not recognized. I think that we should work together at the level of the countries of South America. Most of the universities have a traditional vision of the curriculum that is focused on teaching, on knowledge build-up, on knowledge accumulation. Sometimes curriculum and syllabus or programs are compared to see whether the authors and the perspectives of the different courses are the same. And this tends to happen in big universities. They have long, rigid undergraduate programs. You have to take first a general part of the degree, then you have a specialized part of the degree, and you have to do one first and the other after that. And you have to follow stages. So the course of studies is linear. The students cannot choose different courses, that they are not flexible. The courses are not flexible. So we have these characteristics, rigidity and linear courses or degrees. And that also prevents or hinders mobility and internationalization opportunities. So I think that the financing is a limitation, but also I would like to say that this internationalization is not an opportunity unless those universities have internationalization as a goal and they invest the resources for that. Taking into consideration the internationalization experiences that we have here, they are not horizontal or independent or autonomous. They are dependent. Regarding other of the questions that were presented, so that I could present my presentation, I would like to say that I was leading a project on strategic areas of public policies in my country, in Argentina. In Argentina, universities are autonomous and they have the power to define their curriculums, their courses, while following some general regulations. Within this context, I had to design a system to ensure some the recognition of some courses internally to promote internal mobility, because we have this problem. Many students have the opportunity to travel abroad, to study abroad, and for those courses to be recognized here, but courses from other national universities were not recognized at their own universities. So we had that problem. And as we said, universities have the knowledge and the history to decide what they teach. But what we try to do is to conduct a process so that the autonomy of the institutions was valued, but at the same time, we try to reach a consensus. And that consensus led to agreements or lasting agreements. But what were the challenges or the difficulties to reach that consensus, to have those agreements, so that universities recognize each other courses? And we wanted also to consider, or for these courses to be recognized abroad, for example, following the system that is applied in Europe. What we saw is that institutions do not want to be flexible. They do not trust on things that are different. What they believe is that what they do is the best thing, and that what others do is not that high quality. So what we try to do is to guarantee trust as the basic principle. So we review all the programs that have been accredited and have equality status, let's say. And also, we needed a decision by the government or a high-profile decision so that some courses or study stages were recognized. So we work with the coordinators of the programs, and we also group all those coordinators into different groups depending on the fields of study. And what we did is to reach formal agreements. This was voluntary, but we created a situation in which those who decided not to participate were lagging behind. All the universities had feared, did not trust the initiative, and because of that, we decided that we were not going to change the curriculums. What we were trying to do is to find common ground in spite of the differences. And also, we took into consideration that many universities were afraid of loss of power or decision-making power of the faculty. So what happened is that, for example, professors were saying, I'm teaching this in a different way to that professor. So they consider that their courses were different. So what we tried to do is to make emphasis to find common ground, to find those areas of knowledge that were common ground. In Argentina, we talk about content and not competences. So what we try to do is to focus on the student. And to conclude, what I would like to say is that the challenges regarding the internationalization of the curricula force us to analyze curriculum from a different perspective. This could be appreciated on the side or by the institutions, but when we think at the regional level and to connect countries, we need to think at the level of public policies. And we need to change the traditional understanding or the traditional concept of curriculum. We need to include flexible model-based mechanisms in order to find that common ground so that students have more options, because today we don't have a single profile of a student. We have diverse students that need to make decisions about what's important for them, and otherwise they are not motivated and they do not work towards their education. So we need to think about a more flexible, non-rigid, non-linear curriculum, but we need to think what is happening in the classroom. And I think that the questions presented to the panelists are very important, because now the emphasis is not on the professor. Now the emphasis is on the student. The focus is there. Learnification theory is still current. The professor is still important, but the professor no longer has the monopoly of knowledge and education right now, as it was in the past. So we need to think of a new role, because it's the role of the professor is to create basic knowledge that guides, that prepares working proposals or collaborative working proposals from a different perspective in the classroom. And this is something that cannot be done through political decisions, through public policies. they cannot say we're going to do this in the classroom. So these perspectives should be included in the perspective or the vision of all the policies created by the governments, so that everybody understands that teaching and learning have a different dynamics. It's not the dynamics of the past. And we need to have this focus on the student and their learning perspective, and that should be included in national public policies. And this is also important now with the pandemic. This is an opportunity that we have ahead. We need to share these views and I think that these type of dialogues help us all, because we can create bonds to recognize and exchange experiences at the South-South level, because our countries enrich each other, and we can contribute to the East in our case, because I'm in Argentina, so that's why I'm talking about the East. And we have a lot to share with you, and sometimes that is not recognized because that's not visible. So that's my conclusion. I would like to congratulate the team for this type of meetings who help us to reflect on issues regarding the curriculum and internationalization.
Thank you so much.
Pose a question here for both panelists, although they have both touched the subject discussed here, the subject of this question, which is, but I'd like a little bit more of details there. The curricular reform processes are an opportunity to promote a transversal approach to internationalization that includes a South-South perspective. What are the main policy challenges to promote this type of approach, in your view? I'll begin with Professor Varghese and then Professor Marquina.
Thank you very much. Let me say that most of the developing countries, whether it is in Latin America or in Asia or in Africa, we are more looking towards westward looking. So therefore, there is a tendency that especially in countries like India, which are more to not only westward looking, also to the Anglophone countries, native English speakers. So we have a lot of influence in terms of our curriculum is heavily influenced by the changes that are taking place, perhaps in UK or USA. And one of the reasons for this change is also because many of the graduates from the top universities are also looking for employment or looking for places to study, either in USA or in UK or in Australia, in the 3 Anglophone countries. So this influences the way in which we try to internationalize our curriculum. Although only less than 1% of the students in higher education, perhaps less than 1.05% of the students in higher education are going abroad, we cannot expect that the curriculum should be changed to suit these minority students, not minority students, this minority share of students, So that is very important to see that how do we try to do that. But at the same time, what is more important is that we should internationalize the curriculum at home. That is the major challenge. It is not for the students who are going abroad. When you talk about internationalization can be at home or abroad. But all the time, the emphasis is on internationalization abroad and the students going abroad. My point is that if you are talking about internationalization and trying to bring about a dramatic change in the curriculum, which is beneficial and making overall change in the higher education system of India, we should focus more on national systems. We should look more in terms of internationalizing the national curriculum. What does it mean? There are many outmoded systems and patterns and theories which are still taught in the universities and colleges. So we have to modernize our curriculum to keep pace with the changes that are taking place in the scientific world. How do you link the knowledge generation, that is taking place. Say, for example, one change that we find politically in the world is that knowledge explosion has taken place, but knowledge use in decision making has declined as a share. So this has a lot of implication. The way in which we try to organize our higher education system, organize curriculum, and also the way in which we try to see that. I like to make 2 points. One, we need to look westward. I'm not against that, but we should also look to our own regions. Latin America may be facing less of a problem because most of the countries are covered by Spanish language, except with the exception of Brazil, perhaps. So you have something which is unifying in one sense. We have in Asia, especially in South Asia, not only political disagreements, but also in terms of the language difficulties that we face. But elite in Asia, whether you belong to India or Pakistan or Bangladesh or any of the countries that you're talking about in Asia, most of the elite speak English, and the languages that are spoken and the curriculum that is formulated are mostly by the elite. Whether they are consulting the right people is something different. So there is a need for us to look southwards. So I'm a member of a group called HEFALA, Higher Education for Latin America, Asia, and Africa. There is an organization that is formed. I am a member of that. So when we meet, so we try to discuss issues which are common in higher education in 3 different regions, So I feel that there is a need for us to look to Africa. There are certain examples that are taking place in Africa, which are very important. Similarly, we should also look to Asia and Latin America, not only confine ourselves to the developed countries and only to the countries which are not only developed, but the West, So the South perspective has not emerged. And also the problem in India specifically is that there is nothing called, Europe has a European higher education area. Latin America has a Latin America higher education area. And Africa has an African higher education area. Unfortunately, in Asia, we do not have an Asian higher education area. This is also one of the dimensions why these collaborations and cooperations do not materialize in reality, and we still remain looking more towards the westward and the United States, especially because there is something called H-1B visa. And if you see the distribution of H-1B visa, most of the top class scientists and engineers from India are coming under the H-1B visa. More than 70%, 65 to 70% of this employment that is given by H-1B visa from the 1980s is given to Indians. So Indians have an attraction to make avail of this, and that also influences the choices, curricular choices within the country and in the university. So I would say that South-South cooperation should be developed. And secondly, within the country, we have to internationalize the education, internationalization at home, and how curriculum changes are to be brought into those students who are not traveling abroad. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Varghese. Now, Monica Marquina, I'm very interested in hearing your views. And in your, I also would like to hear your reaction to some of the ideas that Professor Varghese has put forward here, among them the idea of a regional internationalization for a South-South perspective.
Sí. Bien, en principio.
Okay. Well, first of all, what I would like to point out, because many scholars talk about this when talking about internationalization, like James Knight and many other scholars, is that internationalization is a factor that helps or that improves quality. In a world that is increasingly global, it's not a question, I mean, we are not saying other things here. We're not talking about the opposite, but you know that this culture saying that what comes from abroad invades us, that we need to revalorize what's domestic, that's no longer, I mean, I'm not saying this out of the blue. It is being debated. A lot of people are saying that there are nationalist movements that are still coming up and that they are trying to vindicate this idea of looking inside, of staying domestically, and that they have a strong criticism to internationalization as something imposed on them. So I agree with Dr. Varghese. There is no one single way of thinking about internationalization. You can think of it as cooperation with people from abroad, north, south, because I do not resist that. There's a lot to learn, but that's not the only way or the only possibility. And not having a vertical, like not imposing from the north to the south. It's cooperation, what we need to seek, and internationalization within our country, what Dr. Varghese says, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, internationalization, looking abroad, can come when the institutions have already included within the country an international look or perspective. So I fully agree with you, Dr. Varghese. Now, what I believe is that internationalizing things doesn't necessarily mean a curricular change. It implies a different perspective or look that might go hand in hand with a change in the curricula or not. It's a different perspective, that is to say, opening up our view, more flexibility to understand what's equivalent in terms of competencies and knowledge, equivalent to other things. And that implies opening up our minds. And many times in our systems that are much more traditional, there's a lot of reluctance, resistance to it. You know, if the content doesn't match 100%, then the link is completely rejected, which is actually the basis for internationalization. I definitely agree that internationalization cannot be a privilege for an elite, for just a group of people. And that's why I believe that internationalization at home fosters a more inclusive criteria. But then we also need to foster mobilization with, from students domestically and to abroad. Think about a new curriculum, a modernized way of a curricula. It's not changing the content, it's thinking in a more flexible way. That will help in terms of acknowledgement of one curricula from one country compared to the other. And of course, if we already know that individuals have valued the interaction with the North so much, with the developed countries in the North, the public policies should not reject all that. That is already happening. That already spontaneously happened, but the public policy should add the South-South links. In that sense, by fostering the public policies in our countries, we should also include this flexible view of learning. You know, that students learn in various ways, in many different ways nowadays. It's not only the monopoly teaching of the teacher to the students, and that needs to be included as well, favoring internationalization, favoring acknowledgement of different curricula. I think it's worth analyzing and participating in that debate from the South, and not staying outside just thinking that it is a discussion or a debate from the developed countries in the North. So I agree that the South-South perspective has still not fully emerged. I agree with that, but I think that the way in order to be able to show to the rest of the world how rich our processes are, it's from standing from a flexible perspective or view that acknowledges diversities and that offers our special features of our regions, offering that to the rest of the world. Thank you so much. And now
we'll move to the next panel. So I invite now the two panelists, Dr. Anita Pantakar from the Symbiosis School of Liberal Art in India, and Dr. Pablo Beneitone from the National University of Lanús, Argentina. We will also have two short case presentations, one by Dr. Angel Fernandez from Veracruzana University in Mexico, and then Rene who will, from Fallby, who will be addressing, who will also be presenting a case study. I will try to put some questions here to the panelists, and then we'll invite the guests who will present the cases. So for both panelists here in the second panel, you do have, both of you have long experience in studying and working with different curriculum reform processes. What are the main challenges you have detected in South America and Indian institutions to promote a process of revision of the curricula that includes internationalization of the contents and of the learning experience?
Shall I start, Aziz?
Please.
So thank you very much for this invite. I'm more than happy to talk about what I have experienced personally in the past 11 years with India's first liberal arts college, and with working at a university that was established for internationalization. So what Professor Varghese has talked about has been a pan-India kind of overview of how higher educational institutions in India work and the new national education policy. What I am going to talk about is within that, from my niche area, and I must acknowledge right at the very beginning, two things. Number one, our interactions and collaborations with South America have been limited. One of the things that we have discussed in OBRIAL meetings has been the fact that whatever the reasons, our understanding, our knowledge, and the kind of efforts that we take to reach out and understand higher educational institutions in these areas is not as much as we would like it to be. So this is an opportunity for us to reach out. Through a South-South-North collaboration, I have had some wonderful experiences with a university from Mexico, and Angel is later on going to talk about some of those things. Symbiosis International Deemed University is a fee-financed, non-government aided university, and therefore has a certain amount of freedom and autonomy within its structure across the colleges that it offers. The Liberal Arts College, which was India's first liberal arts college to offer a degree program, and that to a 4-year degree program, I would say that we have the maximum amount of academic and administrative autonomy. Now, when the school was set up, being a 4-year liberal arts degree program, one of the things that we understood right at the very beginning, and therefore the national education policy resonates very closely to us, is that collaborating and working with like-minded institutions, collaborating and working with like-minded faculty, and ensuring that students from diverse backgrounds, not just India and abroad, but even within India, was critical. Because India itself is such a diverse nation, and we don't even understand every single part of India itself. Problems that are faced are common, whether you look at Africa, whether you look at Asia, whether you look at South America, whether it is gender, whether it's diversity, climate change, waste management, human rights, all of these are actually common, similar challenges. And therefore, our focus was not on teaching, our focus was on learning. And that is where we faced, I won't say resistance, but our first challenge, that teacher training, and that change and that shift from being a teacher to being a facilitator was something that we encountered. And this is something that the NEP now talks about. So the NEP talks about, as Dr. Varghese said, that focus on learning, not on teaching, focus on transferable skills, knowledges, attitudes, on multidisciplinarity, which has not traditionally been a part of our mainstream, especially undergrad program. Focus on global citizenship that fits in very well with the Symbiosis motto, and empower all stakeholders. whether they're students, faculty, or anyone, that how do you live in, how do you thrive, and how do you navigate this very changing 21st century knowledge economy or knowledge society that we live in and that we aspire to. So therefore, a very consultative, participative approach to curricular design is something that I feel very happy about when I look at the way the School for Liberal Arts has worked with its program structure, with its curricular design, with its annual curricular and program structure review. And we've included students, we've included parents, we've included alumni, and also very well-chosen collaborators. International collaborations therefore became important, and for us it made more sense because when we started, India didn't have a liberal arts college, and therefore we looked outside. Okay? Today, India has a larger number of liberal arts programs, liberal arts or holistic education, comprehensive education, multidisciplinary education is something that now we are all working towards. So therefore, we started working with NGOs from India and abroad, with different civil society organizations. And we said that if the goal is not to prepare students for a job, but to prepare students for multiple jobs or multiple careers across sectors and for the future, then what we are developing actually is not content and knowledge, domain specific knowledge, but we have to ensure that our faculty, our staff, and our students, they understand the world as it's changing. So therefore, critical thinking, problem solving, working in groups, working across geographies and time zones, cultural and cross-cultural understanding and empathy, these are things that's going to be required. In India, I doubt if even 1.5% of all students, staff, and faculty ever actually travel under immersion programs. Probably even less than that. Globally, it might be 2%, but I'm sure India is even less. Then internationalization at home, which Professor Varghese and Monica have both talked about, becomes so important. But what is this internationalization at home? How do you do it? How do you embed it into a program structure and then make sure that faculty and their teaching associates or assistants are, have developed the ability to teach this? Because that's not easy. Teaching is easy. Ensuring how people learn is a bit more challenging. So therefore, we designed a strong framework for curricular design, semester-wise and annual review and reform. And I'm happy that with collaborations, we even do a gender study of what happens on our floor and in our building. And again, the focus is globalization, requiring global citizens, therefore focus on graduate attributes, learning outcomes. The pandemic actually gave us a very rare opportunity to, reassess what we were doing. By that time, the School for Liberal Arts was about 11 years old. We looked at it, and one of the best things, while the pandemic had many, many horrible things, one of the good things that happened is that suddenly we were reaching out to people that we wouldn't have been able to reach out to. Internationalization tends to be the typical cross-border higher education or mobility tends to be elitist. A lot of large carbon footprints, so therefore climate change activists don't enjoy it. The growing divide between the global north and the global south. This changed. One of our closest partners, which is DePaul University in Chicago, reached out with something that I felt was very timely, called Global Conversations. We came in touch with the University of Veracruzana because of these global conversations. And suddenly you realize that teaching, learning, research, collaborations can now happen without having huge budgets. And so suddenly universities or even colleges that had never thought about it now suddenly had an opportunity. What is it that we do in terms of the actual framework? Very quickly, let me just say that from the university, and the university has this, so therefore this is not just for my college, but the university itself offers some credits that are mandatory, which will come either from a global immersion program or from what we like to call floating credits. Faculty design experiential learning opportunities to complement this. Enough opportunities are given to faculty to meet with other faculty, not only from within the country, other institutes, but also outside the country. And what are they discussing? They're discussing COIL, They're discussing exchanges, virtual as well as real. They're talking about projects. We do co-designed and co-taught courses, collaborative research. And fourth is faculty are trained in education technology, interactive and multidisciplinary pedagogies. So now we've realized that assessments and evaluations need to be out of the box. Faculty must have autonomy to look at their courses the way they want to. If I'm a teacher of physics, I'm going to design my course very differently than someone who's doing cultural studies. And this is something that we've invested in. So we've invested and we've said that, faculty and students own that classroom space. So therefore, a lot of collaborations in terms of joint assignments, projects, they're writing blogs together, they're doing peer reviews together. The point I'm trying to make is that there's a huge amount of investment that needs to be made in the teaching learning resources of a university, and a focus on domain knowledge for sure, because things are becoming more and more obsolete regularly, but also on learning, how do I help students? How do I deal with a diversity in the classroom? Because students learn in different ways. It's not just that they come from different geographies, but they learn in different ways. Their abilities are very different. So how do you help them to learn? How do you help them to unlearn? How do you help them to relearn? All of this is really, really important. Let me very quickly, I'm conscious of time, talk about our collaboration with DePaul, because I think it's really important. And then I'll talk about a new collaboration that we have within Asia. DePaul University and the School for Liberal Arts started a collaboration exactly 11 years ago. We started out with simple semester exchange for students, student exchanges that then went from semester to internships and volunteering. Then we looked at reciprocal faculty visits to study each other's models. This led over time to co-designed and co-taught courses. So right now we have around 12 of those. It led to COIL projects. It led to COIL collaborative research. Then it resulted in, I think, some things that we're very proud of. We co-host an international gender conference. We have faculty from each other on our committees. They do annual program review for us. And they introduced us to their GLE program and the global conversations. And more about global conversations a little later. More recently, about 5 or 6 years ago, liberal arts universities from Asia got together. And we set up the Alliance of Asian Liberal Arts Universities, the South-South. It started out as South-South-North. So American liberal arts colleges and those from Asia, from Korea, from Japan, from China, Singapore, India, Thailand, Singapore, everywhere. And we started looking at liberal arts because it was new for India. Today, it's moving towards the South-South because we've realized that while there's a lot to learn from the North and from especially American liberal arts colleges, Asia has its own unique realities. And within Asia, each one of us also has our very own unique realities. India is a very different place and space than, let's say, a China or a Japan or a Singapore. But we meet regularly and we discuss our challenges. And I think these kind of collaborations that are at both levels, at a policy level, in terms of how do we urge our policy makers to look at education in a very different way, to institutional collaborations, I think this is now the future. For India, I would say the internet has opened up, because otherwise it was a few select universities that had expensive budgets could look at internationalization. Now the budget is not the constraint. Now it's just, how much you can fly and where your students come from and what your graduate attributes are. So I'm going to end here and hand it back to Aziz. I hope I've been able to draw a little bit of, attention to how we've looked at collaboration. And I think it's important to realize that even the collaboration between the faculty and stakeholders within society and community is as much important, because internationalization is something that has spillovers even here. For example, within India, how do we manage diversity? It's a difficult issue. And therefore, it's not just about how do you navigate in a globalized world, but it's also how do you navigate within a country that's so vastly diverse with so many different realities. Back to you, Aziz, and then I hope you'll call me back to bring
Thank
in.
you very much. Thank you very much. You have actually touched some of the issues that were in the next question that I had specifically for you. But now let's hear Professor Pablo Beneitone on the same issue.
Gracias, Professor Saliva, y muchas gracias.
Thank you, Professor Saliva. Thank you for inviting me. I would like to congratulate the team for giving us this space regarding the internationalization of education, and to have this dialogue between the two regions, South America and India. That is a huge country, it's almost a region. By resuming the questions that were asked, and the colleagues and the comments made my colleague Anita Patankar, I would like to talk about our institutional challenges, taking into consideration the perspective of South American universities. We need to see how these processes have an impact, and taking into consideration figures of South America as a whole, we see a significant deficit in South America. We have studies from a colleague from Mexico of 2018, and curricular internationalization included 50% of the universities. They were saying that they were trying to implement some actions towards internationalization. Within the Argentine system, we have figures that are of or about the time during the pandemic. And this includes that the actions of universities in order to promote the internationalization of the curricula increase. And we know that 80% of universities show that they have conducted some actions to promote internationalization of the curricula. But when we try to go deeper, we will see that there are three levels. We have a macro or institutional level, we have a disciplinary or domain-related level, and also we have the level of the professors and the changing in their role. And what we can see is that there is a lack of connection between the levels, these three levels that I have just mentioned before, especially at the level of the universities of the region. When it comes to the institutional level, universities are halfway. When we review the experiences from previous decades, what we can see is that internationalization of the curriculum was not included in the actions and policies of the universities, but then it became more visible. And there is no doubt that the pandemic improved this or promoted the inclusion of this of internationalization in the agenda. But now universities are now showing the importance of internationalization in their policies and in their strategies. But what we see is that at an institutional level, this is not included. There is not a budget in order to promote those actions. So the most successful actions regarding the internationalization of the curriculum can be perceived as isolated measures and not related to institutional policies. And when we think that an actual implementation of the policies requires resources, it's important for the micro level, for professors to have the tools for do that and the training in order to promote the internationalization of their courses or their classrooms, and to improve that relationship, their relationship with the students in these new learning scenarios. What we see is that there is no incentive or no program for institutions so that they can promote the internationalization of the curriculum. And in addition, we see that there are some gaps regarding or there is no recognition for those professors who decide to embark on these complex initiatives. These initiatives require time, and sometimes professors are not recognized. They have no incentive, or they are not recognized by the institutions for their work. And then at the macro or institutional level, what we see is that 20 or 30 years ago, internationalization had a non-visible role, but they have more visibility now. But the relationship or the articulation between internationalization and curriculum that includes other areas that go beyond internationalization. And what we see is that there is no articulation with the academic areas, or at least that relationship or articulation is not that strong. And we need more in order to implement these policies. So what we could say is that at the macro level, in our region, the internationalization policies are there. They exist. There are some structures that reflect or show that those actions are there, but the articulation of those policies within the institutions is something that is not well established. So we need to have actions in universities in order to promote internationalization of the curriculum that reaches all students. And for that, we need to connect or to articulate the international part and the academic part. This is to give you a perspective of what is happening within the institutions. But in addition, we could analyze this taking into consideration the different disciplines or the different domains. And what we see in South American institutions, we have elites that are highly internationalized, and then we have some local groups. So we see that in some disciplines, we have groups of academic actors that include elements in their curriculum so that their curricula are international. But we need a different perspective, because in the different disciplines, there are some groups that are actually making international curricula. But for that, you need to have institutional support. And what we see is that there is no connection between the academic or discipline level and the institutional level. We don't see the good coordination. And sometimes these policies are not being replicated. There is a shortcut with institutional part. And sometimes successful stories or success stories are not replicated. They just stay within a domain. There are some degrees that made progress regarding internationalization, but that is not replicated in other domains or areas. And when we pay attention to the individual level, to the professor, to consider the professor an actor, what we see is that at this micro level, there are indicators that show there is a low level of internationalization, and we see that there is a lot of diversity regarding how professors implement those international aspects. So maybe we should have programs, but this doesn't mean that professors are going to be in line with those practices or with those programs. Professors sometimes, as I said before, do not have a guide, do not have a motivation, and sometimes they have to improvise. Sometimes you have very important experiences, very valuable experiences. This is showed as, this appears in service. There is internationalization, but those are individual and isolated efforts. And therefore, we don't have something that has a greater impact. So that's why institutions should analyze the pedagogical approaches that they want to implement in those processes regarding the internationalization of the curriculum. And also they should take into consideration the role of students and professors that are the two key actors at the individual or micro level. And in the challenges regarding professors and students have to do with the fact that, as it has been said, we need internationalization to be included in the classroom. And professors sometimes include international aspects in their programs or those of their courses, but when it comes to competencies and capacity building, or sometimes it would be to have strategies or to develop a student-based approach. This is something that does not exist because of the reasons that I mentioned before. So we are facing a situation in which these approaches that would allow for a more fluid dialogue, to think together those programs or curricula, to share learning experiences, to share evaluation experiences with colleagues that live in different realities. Probably you're going to mention some of those, for example, COIs, as those collaborative spaces that is not being implemented within institutions in our region. And as a result, what we see that the outcome is poor in our countries, because the implementation of an international curricula is scarce or poor in our region. In the system, we have successful stories or the success stories of internationalization and different disciplines. Sometimes those are individual initiatives. We may know about them because of previous contacts. We know that sometimes professors have previous experiences and they have a relationship with institution with whom they are working, but those individual experiences are not taken to the level of the institution. And that's why sometimes they are not conducted in depth, because there is no macro policy or a sound collaborative policy to define that internationalization that includes all the actors that should be involved. This lack of articulation between the three levels of analysis that I was talking about and the development of each of these levels shows us that the internationalization of the curriculum in our region is a process that has been started, but that the progress is gradual, is moderate. And we should focus on that articulation between these three levels in our universities. Those levels should have a dialogue. And that's a challenge for the future. I would like to stop here. I would like to give the floor back to Aziz so he can continue asking us the questions or the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo.
Invite Dr. Anita Pantankar to discuss the COIL exercises which have allowed her institution to work closely with institutions from Latin America, and to present Angel and Renee Zickman.
Thank you, Aziz. While I was listening to Pablo, if I may just say one thing, the government of India is very actively pushing and supporting for collaborative faculty exchanges and collaborative research. So there are a lot of opportunities with funding for faculty from different institutes, partnering with faculty from international institutions to do collaborative research. And I think that's great. And we've seen a change, not only in the government-aided public sector universities, but also in the private sector. So I think that is something that India is now doing quite actively. They also have policies for inviting foreign faculty to come and teach on campuses. So lots of programs, which are helping. So therefore, it doesn't cut across 100% of the universities, of course, Pablo, but more and more universities taking advantage of this. One of the advantages of Obrial Global and through Obrial, our collaboration with FAUBI, is that now we know more about a part of the world which one is quite ashamed to say this, one didn't know that much in terms of academics. And I think that has enriched. So while we are looking at, there is a nationalist thread, there is I think Professor Varghese talked about rootedness. So while we hang on and hold on and cherish, what is good in our tradition and our heritage and the region, not just the country, but even in the region, and you take what's good from the West, I think we're also looking across, across the world. Online and virtual exchanges in COIL came in as a great opportunity for us. I was talking to you about our very close partnership with DePaul University, and when the pandemic hit, they created a platform called Global Conversations. And they reached out to students and faculty from all their collaborators, and we joined in. It was on that platform that we met some faculty from the University of Veracruzana, Mexico. And today we have associated with them on COIL, on many virtual programs. And I should say that the successful ones have been in the area of faculty development and understanding, of COIL. And that is one collaboration that we're very, very happy with. And therefore, I'm delighted to invite Angel to come and talk a little more about this.
Professor Pantaca, perhaps before you give the floor to Angel, could you briefly describe to the listeners what is COIL?
Okay. So when we look at collaborative online learning, one of the things that for India has been, I'm not going to say it's new, because I think ever since digital literacy became a mandate for most of us and office spaces changed, the pandemic, of course, pushed us towards it, is that one of the skills that global citizens required is the ability to navigate through digital spaces and the internet. This opened up through software a lot of opportunities for faculty to not travel, but to meet each other digitally. And then we realized that those were learning spaces that not only faculty, but students could become members of. And therefore, we looked from the simple. So at our school, we started with simple online attendance of classes. So for example, when we did co-teaching and co-learning, sometimes there was a faculty who actually visited physically. So in the first month, for example, but in the next month, it could be online. And there's a challenge because USA is almost, 10 hours behind us, but students found value in that learning. Teachers found value in that learning. So at 8 o'clock in the night, my students were sitting in front of their laptops with students from DePaul sitting there early in the morning. Then it spread from just a classroom to a project that they do together, to now you have customized courses where faculty are working together to create a course that has, that resonates across geographies. So we did one very interesting class course project, call it what you will, which is called Love, Marriage and Dating in the Times of the Internet. Now, whether you're a student in India or whether you're a student in America, that resonates. And they got together, and it was designed to have learning outcomes, together. So it's not just that you're meeting on the internet, it is that you're creating projects. What the University of Veracruzana has done is that they've created faculty development programs. And those faculty development programs are made for faculty from different geographies, but all of them actually facing the same challenges, so similar challenges. And therefore, it's designed keeping in mind different geographies, different cultures. And in the course of teaching a particular subject, you're also learning about the cultures, you're learning about new cultures, you're learning language skills, you're learning absolutely everything. So for me and for us, COIL has meant that you collaborate in an online space with learning outcomes through a project, a research, a course. It could be a 2-month project, it could be a year-long project, it could be a course that's a credit course. That doesn't matter. But you are facilitated through this. And faculty work together for maybe up to 6 months or a year to design the course, to design assignments, to design how it's going to be done. And then it's actually done in this kind of a digital space. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Anke?
Gracias, Anita. Gracias, Obreal.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you all, Real, as a whole, for giving me the opportunity to share what Anita has commented with you before. All the colleagues that took the floor before, talking about how in Veracruzana University, we've tried to implement all of these, what you've been talking about, what universities, politicians, and big thinkers are addressing. So in the Veracruzana University, we say that we have our own way of dealing with things or implementing things. So let me share with you how we've managed to implement this year. It's a course that is called Virtual International Cooperation. It's based on the COIL methodology, which is collaborative online international learning. It opened up in 2017, and it's opened for people from all over the world every semester. And what we've done together with colleagues from India, with the Symbiosis Institute for Management, and with EAG, College for Sciences, there are teachers and professors from these universities. Actually, there are a lot of teachers joining. Some of the teachers applied the syllabus that they designed with their students in the Veracruzana University, as well as in the Indian universities. So I will repeat what Anita said before. She explained it much better. This opens up the possibility so that teachers can design learning results, but it's not only the ones that they have to deal with, but at a certain point, the teachers can create learning opportunities jointly. And it's a great challenge because it also creates an interdisciplinary vision of work, which means that we are not talking about international competencies, as Dr. Vaquese was talking about before, but also intercultural competencies. And in this case, learning results that depend a lot, or in these cases, on each group. The teacher or professor becomes the main actor, the main player for the whole process of learning, and it also fosters interdisciplinary spaces. I shall mention just a few. The case of university teachers from India together with the Veracruzana University addressed intercultural studies, big data, gender, diversity, information technologies and communication technologies, and their application on biomedicine and healthcare, or the use and learning of other languages, in these cases, for example, English, both for Indian and Mexican students. It's so as wide as our imagination could think of. So these kind of experiences have already been applied not only by teachers in the classroom, by designing the syllabus, but also with students in the classroom. And Anita, if I may, I would like to add something else that has been expressed by the students themselves. This makes them makes their self-esteem increase, because they realize that they can communicate between like one another with people from other cultures, peers from other cultures, that they are more alike, more similar, from Portugal, from India, from Taiwan, from Mexico. This happens, and the working environment is so good and so positive. And I would also like to point out that these kind of experiences has also developed a culture and also communication skills, because we need to learn the skills not only of using another language, but how to express your words, how to communicate your ideas, how to communicate cultural ideas, how to address or to interpret problems. You know, it's so different how, for example, an arts student or teacher can interpret a problem compared with, I don't know, medicine, philosophy teacher. And when we work in this kind of interdisciplinary areas, that becomes much better. And also to identify common goals. When you have a problem, for example, we talk about sustainable development goals. Okay, how is that visualized by a biologist, by a technician, by a mathematician? And you can see that we can have similar and common goals with this interdisciplinary world. And something mentioned by Dr. Marquina as well, we need to create the culture of trust. Regardless of the cognitive part, you create trust, and that opens up collaboration spaces, and it fosters the process of creation of further spaces for cooperation among universities. For example, the case, let's just put a case of what Dr. Marquina was saying, the double certification programs that starts with these mutual spaces and with this trust. And just to wrap up this very brief presentation, in these scenarios, there has been so many positive learnings. COIL has become very fashionable in the last 2 years. I mean, this has been on for 15 years and it has been developing for the last 15 years, but it creates more spaces in innovation, and you need to be disruptive, both with students and with teachers. There is no doubt that there was a lot of resistance at the beginning, and there are a lot of people are dropping out because sometimes they do not feel comfortable in thinking about, for example, working with a teacher from a completely different discipline. So what we say and what we need to do as promoters for these kind of spaces is that we need to have a lot of leadership, institutional leadership. Paulo Speller is here as well. He knows a lot about university leadership, and we need that. So we need to go hand in hand and to help professors to be very much aware of what the market is asking for, the international market, and what it allows for at the same time. A couple of months ago, the International Council for International Competencies was talking about what will impact the higher education in the near future. They talked about the emergence of the use of the resources on the one hand, the climate crisis, the governance from the southern countries, the polarization that the society is undergoing, and they talk about 5 main learning results that we need to pay attention to and that COIL should also address: integration, inclusion, connectivity, which is quite a challenge for our societies in Latin America and for India as well, innovation, and interculturality. In these kind of spaces, therefore, we've seen an opportunity with our COIL methodologies in order to contribute with what we are doing, in this case, between Veracruzana University and India. Thank you so much for this space. Professor Fernandez, so much, but can you clarify one thing? In all your experiences with COIL, the language, was it English? Originally, when we started using the COIL methodology, we brought the content and we offered this course in English in the Veracruzana University. And of course, that we received a lot of criticism by the Veracruzana teachers. Why are you teaching this course in English if our language is Spanish? However, we've kept it. And as of last semester, we opened the possibility of taking the BIC or COIL course in Spanish and in French. It's the first part that we were offering this. And so far we've conducted 11 workshops and more than 1,600 students with the possibility to have participated in these activities. Many of them were learning other languages as well. So we found great solidarity from students from abroad, how they've joined their efforts in order to, I don't know, for example, architecture students from Romania with odontology students from Mexico, and all of them trying to open up new spaces. And that was another big challenge for students and for teachers at the same time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. You've summed up brilliantly, and absolutely. I think some of the things that you've said, resonate so well. Interculturality, trust, and building bridges and building spaces. And on that note, I'm going to welcome a dear friend, Renee, who will talk about FAUBI and some other ways in which collaborations can be fostered. Renee?
Bom dia, boa tarde, buenos días, boa tarde.
Good morning, good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I'll speak in Portuguese. So another example of another kind of intercultural cooperation between Brazil, South America, and India. So as an initiative of Obriel Global, we are leading another chapter by FAUBI, which is the Brazilian Organization for International Education. It's an organization that has been created in 1988, so it is 33 years old, and that it is integrated by cooperating partners that include not only Brazilian universities. It's led by Dr. Marcio Barbosa, that is here present in today's meeting as well. So FAUBI organization acts mainly by creating an internationalization and with greater projection for the universities of Brazil. The context of the COIL modalities and the internationalization of the curricula, 4 or 5 years ago, the FAUBI created a program that is focused on the virtual exchange. It is called Brazilian Work Exchange FAUBI program. It tries to acknowledge the importance of virtual exchange in different modalities or in other methodologies as well, together with a very important tool for the internationalization of the curricula, without the need to have physical presence or mobility. So from home, that implies not so much investment, or it doesn't need so much investment, but it can offer also international possibilities or learnings for all students. Students from different universities that have joined, acknowledging as well the importance of these exchanges. FAUBI, before this very difficult context that we've been facing in the last 2 years, the COVID-19 pandemic, FAUBI had already been focusing on this, but now even more, the virtual exchanges. Virtuality was already present. It was already present because it was a shy way to start dealing with this kind of internationalization at a global level. But the context of the pandemic gave greater importance to this. And it was positive, as a matter of fact, that FAUBAI already had this program implemented, the Brazil Virtual Exchange already implemented, because it made it possible that in the new context of the pandemic, the program could be better and greatly fostered. FAUBAI, mainly in the last 2 years, has made a lot of trainings, has facilitated contact with universities from other regions in the world, with other universities in the world, in order to encourage and foster the use of virtual exchange modalities together with institutions of higher education within Brazil and abroad. It also plays an essential role in the coordination of virtual exchanges of COIL with an initiative that was created approximately a year and a half ago, the Latin American Initiative for Internationalization of Higher Education, which is an initiative that gathers different networks, different associations, similar to FAUBAI, but from 5 other countries in South America, mainly South America, Latin America and South America, where FAUBAI is coordinating a project related with the virtual modality, COIL modality, and different virtual modalities as a whole. Monica Marquina is the leader for Latin America. Monica before was saying that, was mentioning that as well. The higher education institutions in Brazil are very much interested in creating activities, courses, or further programs in the virtual exchange, that is to say, whether it is COIL or other methodologies that are already existing. The participation of FAUBAI in the South American chapter for the Oberá Global Observatory opened up great opportunities with institutions of India, and we have great expectations. We've talked about it, we've discussed it with colleagues from India over and over, so that we will be able to implement or get to know more, first of all, about our systems. As Anita was saying, the quality of our higher education programs, the quality of our institutions, the quality of our research projects. All of that needs to be the trust, the common trust, that is the basis for the success of our cooperation, and that will also allow us to identify new opportunities to implement this cooperation, South-South cooperation, making our regions more visible, so that we can present ourselves differently when talking to the North, that is to say, bringing our own agenda as well, and not reacting against what the North brings, as it has historically been.
I also would like to thank Oberá Global for this opportunity to participate in. Thank you very much.
Professora René Zickman, prazer em revê-la aqui virtualmente. Aproveito o ensejo também para cumprimentar o presidente da FAUBAI.
I also would like to congratulate the president of FAUBAI. I would like to say that FAUBAI made a great work regarding internationalization of universities.
Perhaps I could now take this opportunity to pose questions from the audience to all members of this panel. So we do have a question from just one second, Professor Ramon Torrent. And he directs the question specifically to Professor Varghese, but if other members of this panel want to comment, you are more than welcome. Can you give the exact reference of this association entity, Asia, Africa, Latin America, you have mentioned in your intervention?
Thank you very much. This association is higher education in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, EFALA. This is located in South Africa. And the meetings are normally held in Addis Ababa. I have attended to 1 or 2 meetings of this. And one professor, Dantu Tefera, who is the head of the education department in one of the universities in South Africa. He is the person who is coordinating these activities. You can go to the website and just type Hafala. I sent a message to the person who asked, a gentleman who asked about it, to Ramon. No? Ramon is the person who asked about it. I already sent a message.
Thank you.
This is a new initiative started 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, if I remember correctly. We could not meet last year because of the COVID. They planned for a meeting in November, but that is postponed. Next year, maybe meeting in June. That also may be in Addis Ababa, because that is a place which is suitable for coordination, for the coordination purposes.
Thank you very much. I will now pose a question to Anita and perhaps Angel, Professor Anita Pantacar and Professor Angel Fernandez. You mentioned, both of you mentioned some resistance from professors in sometimes joining international activities. So what strategies have you used to address this resistance to internationalization that might be common among professors and students? Why not?
Shall I start? So I don't think it's resistance that we faced. I think with Indian faculty, and I'm sure this is the case in many other countries, faculty are pretty overworked, if I may say. They have a teaching load. Today, the world has changed. When I became a teacher, I was the sole learning resource for my students in class. Today, I'm one of the learning resources for my students, and therefore keeping up to date, depending upon, of course, the subjects that you're teaching. So preparation, research for the class has gone up. Education technology and learning that, takes time. Now the government of India, the world over actually, but especially now, publishing papers in Scopus or Web of Science or something, that takes time. If you're at the undergrad level, then student mentoring, etc., takes time. So very often some teachers then tend to prioritize. I'm not going to say they resist it, but they do say that, this year I'm focused on a project. This year I have to do field work. Internationalization, and especially where you're going beyond just mobility. When it was simple, 20 years ago, you took students, you went abroad, you went on an exchange. That was comparatively simple. Today, we're not saying that. Today, we're saying that working, designing, collaborating with international partners, whether it's COIL or whether it's any other form of internationalization, and even if it's internationalization at home, there's so much to study. There's a lot of scholarship that is coming up in this area itself. And therefore, we often find that faculty, and we accommodate this, we give faculty this choice. Of course, within Symbiosis, since it was established for international students, and we have a high number of international students, faculty and students who come in expect a particular level of internationalization. But otherwise, sometimes faculty will pick and choose. It's not possible for a faculty to be everything. To be terrific in class and to be updated and to do research and also to create innovative, international programs or courses. So I would say it's not resistance, but I think it's just a prioritization, which might change, from year to year. Sometimes you get a funded project. Let's say, we get a lot of projects with, let's say, Erasmus or UCARI or something. That takes up your time. So I think it's managing and navigating and prioritizing. We've noticed that once in 4 years at least, most of our faculty tend to get involved in some international project of significance. And a lot of senior faculty mentor junior faculty. As far as the COIL is concerned, this was actually one of the questions when I first sent out a mail about the COIL project, with Veracruzana. That is the first question I got, is it going to be in English? Because if it's going to be in Spanish, I don't know Spanish. Then there were people who say, I've learned conversational Spanish, but I'm not going to be able to learn an entire course. So therefore, language, becomes a filter. But now a lot more students, Akhil will be happy to know that more and more teachers are learning French and learning Spanish and learning German, because they realize this is the future.
And Portuguese, and Portuguese.
And Portuguese. I don't know, does that help, Aziz?
Yes, very much indeed.
Yeah.
Perhaps Professor Fernandez would like to react.
Gracias. Me encantó la respuesta.
Thank you. I love Anita's answer. Sometimes something uses something as resistance and seeing this as an area for improvement, an opportunity for improvement. So I agree with her. I think that is kind of a resistance regarding the interests of those who are promoting those activities. Regarding Aziz's question, little by little, what we are trying to do is to international offices. For example, in the case of Veracruz, Sana University is the International Relations Office. We don't want to be considered a visa management office, or that we are just dealing with passports or scholarships. I'm in charge of academic international agreements or international academic agreements. That's a job that we have to do. But what we want is for professors to consider as allies. When we test COIL methodology courses, when we work to improve online international competency courses, what we are trying to show professors is that we are trying to support their work. What we try to do is to work hand in hand with them. We are very clear with professors. There's a lot of work to do. Professors who decide to participate in COIL, they need to be aware that they will have more work, that they will have to spend 2 or 3 weekends to prepare for this. But this is a lot of work for their practice, but this improves a lot, not only their teaching experience, but also their experience with the students. I would like to share the comments of the students. The students said it was because that's is a great reward, and professors realize that students end up being able to communicate in a different language, for example, in English, so they feel rewarded after those courses. And we are using a new concept in Veracruzana, the academization of activities. And we have a certificate that is supported by the official instances of the university. So they support or certify the credits. It's not only our Office of International Relations that records all the activities, etc., but also we have the office or the central office of the university, and we have this kind of motivation or reward for professors. They will have a specific certification that we recognize by official entities. Those strategies have allowed us not only for professors or for faculty to be able to participate, but also that they feel that they are being supported. So faculty tend to come to us. For example, we have 3 courses this year, and we have only 90 vacancies, 30 for bilingual courses, and we receive over 500 requests or candidates. So that shows that there is a lot of interest, and we can strengthen our work in internationalization, and little by little we are having the support of faculty. I think that Professor Fernandez is having some connectivity issues.
Perdón.
Sorry.
Okay.
No, no se escuchó.
We couldn't hear you. We couldn't hear your last comment. Sorry.
Bueno, solo mencioné que esto nos ha permitido
I just wanted to say that this helps us to have a sound relationship with professors. We don't have to convince them. They come to us, not only because of the certificate, but because this improves their practice, their professional practice. We are trying to respect their courses, and also we are trying to respect the curricula of their different degrees, let's say. We are running out of time, so I would like to ask you a final question. That is going to be a general question. This question is for any of the members of the panel. But please, for those who are going to answer the question, please be as brief as possible. My question is as follows. With the pandemic, we were forced to use technological resources for our classrooms. There was a time in which 100% of the activities were virtual. The pandemic is starting to become less of a problem, but I would like to ask you, what's the role of technology and what will be the role of technology and internet and the internationalization of the curriculum, especially for those countries in the global south within 2 or 3 years? And what measures or what lessons learned during the pandemic will continue and which things will not continue to be applied? Anita, you have the floor.
To be very brief, I think technology and online offer huge advantages. I think it offers internationalization benefits to students, faculty, and institutions that do not have great budgets. Therefore, it will save on time and money. I think when we get back to face-to-face, it'll be important for academic administrators to design very carefully some online or digital interventions, courses, etc., because it does have advantages. Lots of disadvantages, obviously, and access in countries like Africa, Asia, even India is not perfect. But I think a good blend is important because of the benefits.
Thank you very much. So Professor Varghese and then Professor Marquina before we wrap up and finish the panel. Professor Varghese, you are on mute.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? I would like to add 1 or 2 footnotes to what Anita very clearly and cleverly pointed out. One is that most of us moved to online mode under the impression, under the framework that TNA, what is called, there is no alternative. The option was either the whole transaction was closed down or you continue something. So there is the digital divide that is taking place. More than that, what is less recognized is that there is no preparation of the course for online. What is happening is that the transaction is online, but the courses that are developed remain still face-to-face interaction on papers, etc. So this is a danger. We cannot have these online courses, So universities have not invested. As Dr. Anita pointed out, I am not talking about the financial investment. Universities have not invested academically to develop courses to follow the 4-quadrant model or any other things. They are not developed those courses. What is happening is that previously I used to depend on the textbook and board and face-to-face interaction. That is changed now to online interaction. What I am teaching is the same. There is no change. And this is a dangerous situation for higher education. On the other hand, if we try to develop the courses, modify the courses to suit the requirements of an online program, that is very different. A positive element, something that has happened in many universities, is that they had taken video lectures of very renowned professors from economics or sociology or history, etc., globally, and they give these lectures during the lecture time, or they send it in advance, and the classrooms have become process of animated discussion. That has changed quite positively. That is a very, very positive change which has not happened earlier, and that is something that is very good. And thirdly, what is also happening is that teaching learning process, which used to be in the classroom between the students, a confidential contract between the students and the teachers, has become an internationally connected activity. So for example, I am giving, or we all are participating as panelists. Now you say that this is recorded. So this is played, and this can be played anytime. So I should be careful as a vice chancellor, any statement that I make. But in the classroom, I can be more critical, or I can make a statement. So what I mean to say is that I had to prepare differently to deliver, not the course content. I'm talking about the way that we are trying to deliver the courses. That is done. But I think the biggest difficulty that we are facing is that unless we invest time in developing courses suitable for the online, that will be very, very difficult situation. I think evaluation is really a casualty. And in India, we had a lot of chaos and confusion related to evaluations. In some of the state governments, regional locations, the government said that everybody should be passed or 90% should be passed. So there is a grade inflation that is taking place as part of what we consider this. The last point I will say is that there is a lot of what I like to call is a concentration to an elite nature because of English language. A major share of the transaction or online courses are in English language, and many a time the native English languages are not followed by our students from government, coming from the government schools and the rural areas. So this is creating a different time. With all these limitations, I will say that many of the things that we started will remain online only. So for example, if I had to organize an expert committee meeting on a project or a presentation to be made, I will not invite 20 people to Delhi, to my university. I will say that, okay, let us organize it, so that, travel time can be saved, money can be saved. As Dr. Anita very rightly pointed out, it at one point of time, at certain instances, it is very working out to be economically very friendly. That's all what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now invite my Argentinian friends, Professor Marquina and Professor Bereitone, like to ask you to be very, very brief.
Muy rápido. Yo creo que las tecnologías...
Yes, very briefly. I believe that technologies are here to stay and that they will make higher education systems expand more and more in the world. This is an opportunity, but I mean an opportunity if there is a change, because you can expand and multiply the non-change. The traditional can be expanded as well. So we need to make the most of these opportunities in order to benefit from technologies to change the focus, to become more flexible with the curricula, and to be able to provide this new vision that we've been talking about. Technologies are here, but if our mindset doesn't change before our conceptions don't change, we will just repeat with technology the typical vision of the non-change. And I do believe that technologies will enable this kind of meetings. If it weren't thanks to technology, we wouldn't be able to do this. So it's a new opportunity to strengthen the links and to try to think how to change jointly with a South-South perspective. Thank you. And just to add one more comment, yes, indeed, I agree. The devices are the tools that will cooperate with us, but they cannot be the end in itself, like the purpose in itself. I mean, COIL is not the sense, it's the tool that enables other people's, to reach other students, to add more competencies. So same thing, that the design of those tools mediated by technology, they need to be planned and articulated, thinking about what we want to achieve by means of those tools. It's not that they will become the main focus or the end in itself. It's the means to reach that end, which is actually to create and to promote more global graduate students. So it has to be the tool, it has to be the means, the device that will support us in our efforts to reach those goals.
Então, com meu muito obrigado.
Thank you so much. Then I would like to thank all of you. Thanks for all your participation, everyone who participated in this panel. It has been a pleasure to listen to all of you, to see some people again here, Marcy over there as well. And I hope that we will have further opportunities for cooperation in the near future. I would also like to thank Paulo Speller. I would also like to thank Aubriel. Paulo Speller, there you are with your camera opened. And my colleagues, Paulo has a brilliant career, and I'm sharing with him a lot of activities currently, so I'm lucky enough to do that. Because of the time, because we are really running out of time, that's why I'm not giving the floor to you. But yes, thinking about different perspectives, the perspectives that can be implemented at home, thinking about at home and abroad. And we might have to think about a new category that will include both things, the virtual internationalization that maybe is also here to stay. And it doesn't have to be analyzed with a universal perspective, which is as we usually think of it, but it can also be thought with a regional perspective. And it has to be understood in both senses, North-South and South-South. Therefore, I will wrap up my participation as well by thanking all of you again, all those who have joined us for this webinar, both during this debate and virtually. Thank you so much, all of you.